All right, here we are with another special episode of Scrap Talk. Last week we had Randy Couture. This week we have MMA pioneer, Nogi, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu trailblazer, old school MMA legend, UFC veteran, pride fighting veteran, Chris, the West Side Strangler Brennan. How are you doing, Chris? Thanks for being on with us.
Doing well.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
We get started, Chris. First thing I like to ask is, what got you into MMA, or did you start with like karate or jiu-jitsu or something else, or what got you started?
Kind of the same story as a lot of people I saw. UFC 1, and I literally started training the day after UFC 1. I was bouncing at a bar with I bounced at two different bars, and one bar Todd Medina worked at, and he fought in UFC 5, and the other bar Kimo worked at, and he fought in UFC 3. And I just started training the next day, and trying to I saw some people fighting, getting paid, not getting arrested. I was like, man, sign me up. So that was kind of just the intro. And then I went into a gym and did the typical, I want to be in the UFC, and got thrown into a boxing ring with a kid named Seneca, he ended up being a junior world champion, junior Olympic champion in boxing. And he like split my face all over the place in 15 or 16 seconds. And I was like, okay, well, I don't feel like I came in cocky. I just said I want to be in the UFC. That was my goal. I wasn't coming in saying I could beat anybody up at the time, but I got how it goes, and I got kind of greenlit for a second, and then from that point on, I kept coming back, kept training, and got in by UFC 16. There were no weight classes at the time, so I was trying to get in, but I couldn't get in until 16. They had the first lightweight tournament, and I got in on that.
So when I was kind of researching your
was UFC 16 the UFC Brazil?
No, it was Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I was researching your early life, I saw where there's kind of a moment where you kind of turn things around, and you kind of change the trajectory of your life, and you start bodybuilding. You get into the gym. Someone at a gym actually takes a few minutes to talk to you and kind of changes everything for you. From that point to like watching UFC 1 to like starting to train, what was that time frame?
Oh, well, that happened at 17, just about 17. And then I didn't start training until I was 21. So at 17, I started bodybuilding. Maybe it was 16, somewhere before I turned 17. And then 17, 18, 19, I lifted and competed in bodybuilding. Turned 20 and continued to lift a little bit longer. And then somewhere around right as I turned 21, I think I turned 21 in October, and November was the first UFC. So I was training at 21, but I started, I was like, I was walking around 220 when I was bodybuilding, competing at like 198. And then when I started training jiu-jitsu, I think I probably walked in there maybe 200, 205. And stopped juicing and just started training, and my weight dropped down. I end up probably walking around 185, and just being fit, being in shape, and not a meathead.
Well, what gym did you start training at? Did you start as like a jiu-jitsu gym, or was it MMA gym, or?
So I went into a place just called South Coast Martial Arts in Costa Mesa, California, and there was boxing there. There was a guy that taught jiu-jitsu there. And there was a Jeet Kune Do guy, and he was like, still to this day, probably the scariest guy I ever trained with. Older guy. He passed away a little while ago, but I trained with him for years. And then I didn't see him for probably like 5 years, 6 years. I had been in the UFC, I'd been in Pride, and then we got in contact again, and he wanted to train, and God, I was just as scared. I was just as scared getting in the ring to spar and move around with him as I was when I first started. He was just like lightning fast, built like a tank, but like super fast still, and a lot of power, and just violent. The JKD guys were always violent.
Yeah. What who belted you in jiu-jitsu? I know you're like one of the American kind of pioneers for Brazilian jiu-jitsu, especially no-gi, but Who belted you in?
I originally was getting promoted from John De La O, who was the guy at the South Coast Martial Arts that was teaching there when I started. He was a black belt under Halson, and then I got promoted. My black belt and all my stripes and everything come from Frangina, who is the owner of Paragon, who's like the coach of Jeff Glover and Bill Cooper and those guys.
Okay. Well,
I had a hard time getting promoted for a long time after blue belt.
Okay. So is that why you sorry, cut out for just a second. Was that why you switched to no-gi jiu-jitsu? Or why did you make that transition to no-gi?
No, that's why it was hard to get promoted, because I wouldn't put the gi on anymore. I just had the conversation the other day. I seemed to be quicker to get if you grab the lapel, if you grab the sleeve, if you grab the pants, if you grab the belt, like all of that shit's not there when you take the gi off. So you could not convince me that it was going to make me better without it, or it was going to make it tighter without it, because I still had to create new grips and new handles without the gi on. So my idea was like, why would I not just train without it all the time and work on being tighter without it on, and if anything, if I'm really tight without it on, it would make my gi game tighter, but it's not going to go the other way. The other way just doesn't make sense. Plus, I wanted to fight. I didn't want to compete in sport jiu-jitsu. So I didn't see the point in training in it, because like I use the example a lot. You don't see like street bike racers train in motocross, right? Like they train what they do. You don't train in a different sport to get better at the sport that you're competing in. So it didn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you. Like, and like their traditionalists are real weird about it, because I remember when I was in Brazil, like I was wondering if there was a no-gi jiu-jitsu class, because at the time I still want to be an MMA fighter too, and they looked at me like I had friggin' smoking turd hanging out of my mouth, like why the hell?
That was me in '95. I was down there in '95, and I didn't want to put it back on. Every private I took was without it. Then I accepted a fight so I could start training without it. But once I got my blue belt, I opened my own gym, which is crazy, but I opened my own gym as a blue belt, and no one was interested in promoting me. I was getting bashed online all the time for not having the gi on. My jiu-jitsu is not real, blah, 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 blah. That's why when I retired from fighting, I went directly into competing at Nogi Pans and Nogi Worlds, and won Worlds 3 times, just so anybody that said my jiu-jitsu wasn't real, I was like, okay, well, what are all these Brazilians getting beat with? Then, you either got to admit that my jiu-jitsu is real, or you're getting beat by something that's not jiu-jitsu.
Well, first, since you talk about that, open up a gym when you was a blue belt, right? When I first started, even after you had, years later, jiu-jitsu gyms were still real scarce. Like it was, there were gyms, but there might be a 2-hour drive between gyms. Now, right. Just in the small town I live in, there's I think 4 grappling gyms. And there's so many black belts now. Do you ever feel like it's watered down any at all? Like the old Taekwondo used to be like a jiu-jitsu in every strip mall, or just think that many more guys are practicing it?
No question. And where I live in Texas, it's not really bad yet. But like out here, I'm in Vegas right now. In Vegas, they are on every corner. In California, they're on every corner. There's jiu-jitsu gyms everywhere. And it's just like, man, it was so crazy. When I opened my gym in South Orange County, it was just me. Then there was a couple other guys within 10 or 15 miles. Joe Moreira was down in Newport Beach. There was guys like really spread out. The Gracies were in Torrance, but there wasn't like a million gyms in between. So now my gym, probably the next closest one is 5 to 7 miles from me in Texas. But here, it's wild here in Vegas. Like I look and I was like, was that the same one as yesterday? But it wasn't. It's a different one. It's like whatever street I'm on, there's like jiu-jitsu gyms in the same spot, in little strip malls all over the place. And it's cool that it's more mainstream. I look at it as like I provide a top product, right? Like my gym's gonna be top tier no matter where it's at. And so all these other people that think you can just open a gym, or anybody that's left my gym to open a gym, or everyone thinks it's so easy. The more people that they get involved in the sport, when their gym closes, they've got a place to come train. So
well, that's true. That's true. But yeah, like I don't know. it was just weird to me because I remember grappling because I guess people get promoted a lot faster now. Maybe that's why they think I can open up a gym because I'm a brown belt,
Right.
for a black belt. When I started, it took at least 10 years to get a black belt. Now I'm seeing guys get it in 4 years. 3.5 years. And BJ Penn was like the only guy back then to get one in 3 or whatever years, and he was a prodigy. So it's just, to me, it's just, I don't know, it's just odd that it's like you said, just every corner. I don't know who's promoting all these guys, or if it's for money or what. What do you think that reason is? There's so many black belts.
I mean, there's definitely people getting promoted that are being bought, right? Like I'm sure the guy I'm talking about right now that's got a black belt recently in 3.5 years, and he's kind of trash talking a lot of the other real jiu-jitsu guys, and this guy is terrible at drilling, right? Like he can't even look good drilling, so he's not a real jiu-jitsu black belt. But for example, I have a guy that did get his black belt in 4 years. I have a guy who was a blue belt, destroying black belts in competitions, breaking shoulders, finishing guys constantly in fight to win matches, on that fight to win pro stage, as a blue, then as a purple, then as a brown, and there was a point where I was like, well, I'm not going to sandbag you, and let guys keep getting their arms ripped off by a purple belt when they've been a black belt for 5 or 6 years. And they're questioning me, why are you holding them back? And I'm like, bro, he's been training 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, 3.5 years. And so finally, I promoted him, and I was like, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of shit for this, but you're capable of, defending it. If someone's got a question about it, hop on the mat with him. And he's a cop and teaches a lot of the tactic stuff. So he's had other jiu-jitsu black belts be like, what, you got promoted, whatever, let's roll. And then he'll roll them up, and they're like, oh shit. Okay. He's very physical. He's probably 195, real lean, in shape, and strong and young. And, but he's very technical, and he's a problem. So, he's my one guy that got it fast. My kids got it, I think, in 7 and 8 years. Mine was 7 years, but that's 7 years, like not working, not doing anything but training all day, every day, putting in work 7 days a week. And so there's some you can't dispute. And also, like, so my kids were white, yellow, orange, green, blue, purple, brown, and then they got their black. They had each belt for about a year. There were other kids. So when Lucas was a blue belt, there was the Tackett's, there was Tynan Halper, there was Roberto Jimenez. There was all these kids that were also super studs. They were all winning everything at the time, but they wanted to compete in jiu-jitsu, and continue competing in jiu-jitsu. Lucas wanted to fight. Well, all of them had black belt submissions. Like, they had all beaten black belts on their record as a blue belt, So I promoted Lucas to blue. Those guys did juvenile 1 at blue, juvenile 2 at blue, men's blue at 2, or so they had 3 years just at blue belt. So Lucas got his black belt before them, but they all were beating black belts. They just did it for competition reasons and kind of hung out in those divisions so they could continue to try to win worlds at each level of the juvenile and then men's. But they were all black belts technically at 16 years old. They're monsters at 16 years old.
Chris, what's it like coaching your own kids at a high level?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's definitely a whole family thing. It's our whole lives. That's what we do. Like I said, we've been out here in Vegas for the last couple months, just training. Lucas is waiting on a short notice fight for the UFC, so he's been like 20 pounds down, waiting for to cut the last 10. But we've been here for 2 months doing that. Tyler fights next weekend out here in Vegas, his second amateur fight, and then he'll go pro after that. But it is from wake up to sundown. I'm making breakfast so that by the time they wake up, the food's ready, their drinks are ready. We cold plunge, do all that stuff, head to Syndicate for jiu-jitsu, after jiu-jitsu or mitts with Coach Wood, then directly into the pro practice. Pro practice ends a little after 1. we come home and we chill for a bit, and then we're back there at 5 for small groups and 6 o'clock for jiu-jitsu, or more myths, and then home. And, they get some video games or movies or whatever in between, but it's hard. That they've been doing that shit since they were 10 or 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler was gone for 6 years to wrestle in college. And then went from Little Rock right to Vegas to start training and fought 2 months later. So I've been fortunate to be able to build my gym to where I'm able to spend a lot of time with them, working with them, training them, coaching them from a young age. I typically, like, for example, if they were to lose a match, when they were young, I never really got on them for losing a match, because if you have someone that's working that hard and competing at that high of a level, they don't want to lose, right? They didn't do it on purpose. So I would a lot of times I would go, they'd go, pout somewhere or be upset for a few minutes. And a lot of times I'd go find them. Then my ex-wife was just like, leave them alone. Don't go follow them, and see. And I was like, it wasn't to get on them. It was just like, are you okay? Kind of more babying them when I shouldn't have. But I'm in it, as much as they're in it. I'm not putting in the physical that I was, when I first started, like they are now, but I understand all of it, so I'm able to be I know what they need. I know what I didn't have. So I'm trying to provide it for them. And so it's been a blast. It's been obviously the MMA side of things is way, way more stressful, than when I was fighting, they're the ones doing it this time. So I'm not in control of it. They are very good at responding to my coaching quickly. So that's good. But, I think probably watching them fight as a dad who did it and coaching them as a dad who did it compared to maybe another parent that's watching their kid fight, they're nervous, but I know all the possibilities, right? Like I know this sport is a fucking split second you're going one way and a split second you're going the other, and you got to be locked in. So I feel like they get a little more insight from me than you would from your typical dad that's coaching from the sidelines. But I'm also fortunate that I get to do that as well. And then now out here in Vegas at Syndicate, Coach John Wood is, he's coach of Merab and all these champions. He sees the value in me. So now he's got me coaching as well, teaching some jiu-jitsu classes, running some of the pro practices and whatnot. So it's been pretty awesome. I get to work with some great guys, and my kids get rounds with top tier, every single day. There's top tier rounds with people.
That's awesome.
So when you're teaching out there, do you teach? Has anybody else mastered the 10-finger guillotine choke or the Kimura, or have you not moved past that?
No, but funny, Josh Hinger?
I don't know who that is.
So Josh Hinger, they call it the Hingertine. He was out here in Wei Lee's camp, and he was one of my students when I was in California before I moved to Texas, and he's been known a lot for his 10-finger as well. And it started with me, and then he's adapted it his way. I've adapted it my way, but we both have a really solid guillotine. So he's the only one that was out here that really had a grip and a tight guillotine like mine. I've got gigantic hands for a guy that's 5'8". So I think once I catch onto someone's chin, I can 5-finger or 10-finger, one hand or two hands, to finish. And I try a lot to explain it and help coach it well. Both of my kids are huge on rear naked choke. They get the back a lot and rear naked choke a lot, but they'll use the 10-finger or the 5-finger to sweep if they're on bottom just to get to the top, and they use it very effectively. But no is I think probably not to my level. I don't think anyone's doing it. I feel like if I get a hold of your neck that way, it's like high 90% chance that I'm going to finish the choke. And I've got that with my Kimuras and my guillotines. Those are two things that are like, for me, like highest level.
So I remember it's been years ago at a seminar of yours I went to back in like 2005, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
And you taught a 10-finger guillotine choke then, and I've used it since, like forever. And like, it seems like no one has a clue what it is. Did you come up with that, or did somebody teach that to you?
No, well, my grip I came up with, I originally, there was a guy fighting in Shooto named Poquinho, and I think he was from Shaolin, Andre Pederneiras, where like Aldo and those guys come from. I think he was from there. Had a really nasty 10-finger guillotine, slightly different grip. There's people now that re-grip, they'll pass like a reverse handshake grip this way and roll the wrist. Mine is just here and here, and then I cup and I pull the chin and roll the jawline to finish it. But very rare does anyone get out, and I'm able to, whether I'm on top or bottom, use my leg as pressure as well to push my hand further into the neck. And I've adapted. Like I spent probably 10, 12 years, 15 years between Kimuras and guillotines, just like really fine tuning those two things and my passing. And so I use the passing to get to half or to side control, knee on belly, to allow you to turn into me. And once you turn into me at all, there's the guillotine there. If you go back to your back, the Kimura's there, and they just kind of play off each other.
Well, like I said, I know I was just that one seminar I went to, like I still like until I broke my leg not long ago, but that was the choke I used forever. And like I said, just it didn't seem like anybody ever knew it. So kudos to you for helping me with that.
Thank you. Glad I stuck with you.
We'll move forward past jiu-jitsu and talk about some MMA stuff. So you fought in Pride, Cage Rage, Shooto, UFC, fought in everything. Which company was it like the coolest one for you, like the best experience, and why would that be?
I mean, Pride was good. It was, the fans were awesome. It was cool to fight in Pride because Pride was the thing at the time. UFC was obviously good. But honestly, fighting it, like we fought in Hawaii a handful of times with Brennan Kamaka and all those guys. They had a really cool event over there called Warriors Quest. They really took care of the fighters because it was fighters promoting the fight. So it was fighters taking care of fighters. Fought in Guam, same thing. They were awesome that way. But I mean, prestige-wise, obviously it was great to fight in the UFC and in Pride. Pride was shady, super shady. And like everyone, would assume that they were. But just my intro alone to Pride was wild just because I took it on a short notice deal, 5 days or something. I got to Japan. The weight class that they had, I think it was 183 was their first. It was like 183 and up to 200, maybe 200 and over. And then 183 and under was the lightest weight class at first until they added the 161. So I showed up and I make 183. And then they come to me and they said, hey, Mitsuoka's lighter. He's 179. Can you make, 181? And so I was like, okay. So I went and cut. And I took this fight on 5 days notice, not in shape. I was like building a gym. I was a second gym in California at the time. And so I went and cut 2 more pounds. I come back and like, hey, if you can make 180, it'd be great. I'm like, fuck. Okay. So I go cut to 80. And then I come back and they want me to make 79 now because that's what he is. And I'm like, why didn't they ask this in the first place? So my brother is there and he goes, hey, if you want to make 179 after all of this, he goes, he needs some sort of compensation. And right now I'm just on a 1-fight deal. They brought me in to fight this guy. And he said, we need some sort of compensation. And they said, okay, do you want Chris to win the fight? And I looked at my brother and I was like, what? And I was like, no, I'm going to win the fight, and they said, okay. So they end up signing me to a 4-fight deal. But right then we walked away and I was like, I knew that shit happened over here, man. I was like, holy smokes. But it was weird that they asked me that because I was fighting a local hometown guy, a Japanese guy from there that they were trying to build up. And so I don't know what their point was of asking me that. I'm sure they weren't going to give me the work and give me the win over the guy, because even after I beat him, armbarred him, they made us fight a second time, right? They argued that he didn't tap, and they restarted the fight and make us fight again. And then I Kimura'd on the same arm that I had already armbarred. And so I was like, God, were they giving him another chance just because, because they want him to win that bad? So it was weird, but crazy things happened. I cornered Rampage over there against Sakuraba. Super strange stuff happened in that whole weight cut thing. And they just were, they were shady. We sat in the hallway of the hotel after the fight and lined up, and just one by one, you'd go in the room and they would open this big ass safe and set block of cash on the table and push it across to you. And you got paid US dollars cash and like big money. Dan Henderson was collecting like $230 in cash, and it was just like, holy shit.
Well, I've always heard stories like that, but I've never heard it, from somebody that was there. So that's pretty awesome to actually hear it from somebody that's there. Cause we all know why they shut down, because the Yakuza, was running it. So,
oh yeah.
So, stuff like that went on. But you talked about your fights in Pride, but you fought guys in Pride like Tatsuya Kawajiri, you fought Takanori Gomi and Shooto. Pat Miletich, you fought, I think, 3 or 4 times. Like, who was the toughest guy you fought? Like, who was the guy who just like couldn't piece that together? Oh, 3 times.
Probably Pat, just because Pat was really good at making you fight his fight, And at the time, I was very inexperienced. I fought Pat as a blue belt. I was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and it wasn't like I had college wrestling or pro boxing and I was a blue belt. Like, jiu-jitsu was my shit, and I was a blue belt. So I was better than your average blue belt at the time, but I just I didn't have what it took skill-wise to beat him. Mentally, I was there. My first fight with him, we went to a 20-minute draw, 1 round. 2 months later, we went to a 30-minute split decision loss, 1 round. And then so we were fighting at our walk-around weight the first 2 times at 185. Then our first time in the UFC, it was at 170. And that's the first time I ever had to cut weight. And I didn't wrestle, so I didn't know anything. And leading up to the first 2 fights with him, I was training in my garage with a brown belt that I brought from Brazil and a couple other guys, but like didn't have any real MMA training. I was doing some boxing, but it just wasn't the same as you would get at a good gym. And so when I fought him the 3rd time, it was at 170. And I started dieting down. I got to 170 probably a month before the fight. And I was training at 170 because I wanted to be comfortable training at the weight we were fighting at. So we weighed in, and they're carrying him to the scale. He looks like he's fucking dying. And I was like, oh, man, I'm going to whoop his ass. Like, this was too hard for him to make weight, and I'm 170, easy, feeling great. And then, sure enough, comes fight night the next day, and he's huge, back to 185, 190, and I'm still 170. And so that was the first time there was a real physical difference between us. And he was able to choke me against the fence, use the fence and choke me against the fence, like 9 or 10 minutes into the I think it was like a 12-minute round back then, 12-3. And I was, I was really disappointed because I got the first takedown in that fight. And that was the first time I was able to take him down in all 3 of our fights and get on top. And then I ended up getting reversed and jumped a guillotine. And just once I was underneath him, he was just way heavier and way stronger than the first 2 times I fought him. Because, he had cut weight the right way, I guess the right way. And I didn't know how yet. But after that, boy, I was a wizard at cutting weight.
Well, I taught you, and that was for the UFC, was it welterweight championship? This is the first welterweight championship too, wasn't it?
It was the first lightweight championship. There wasn't even a 55 division yet, so it was called lightweight still at 170. And then once they added in 55, that became lightweight, 70 became welterweight. But yeah, I was for the belt.
Okay. I heard you took that fight on short notice too. Is that true?
So yes and no. I got invited to the tournament, but I end up having to fight as an alternate. So back then the alternates would still fight. So I had the same amount of fights as Pat by the time I got to Pat in the finals. But I didn't think I was going to get in. It's only a 4-man tournament. So he's got to win 1 fight and then fight again. So I didn't think I'd get in. He won his fight. I won my fight. I just went upstairs and started eating hot dog and, chilling in the crowd with my family and my friends. And then Mikey Burnett was fighting Eugenio Terao. and they beat the fuck out of each other. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, man, I wonder if these guys are gonna be able to continue, And then Mikey was beating him, but I was like, he looks exhausted, maybe he hurt his hand, I don't know, and I think he broke his hand. But I was like, well, I better go check. So I hustle. I'm in the arena, and I just hustle down the stands, and then I hop over the fence at the bottom and go backstage. And at the time, John Peretti is running down the hall saying, "Brennan, warm up." And I was like, "Oh shit, I'm fighting!" Oh my god, So as I didn't even put two and two together, I start warming up, and then I looked at my brother, and I was like, "Fuck!" I said, "It's Pat again, huh?" And then yep. So that's when I realized it was Pat, and so it wasn't really a short notice fight, aside from being 30 minutes from when the last fight was, but it was just at that time you just didn't know who's next, and I figured out it was Pat after he won his fight, I won my fight. The guy who was supposed to move on and fight Pat had to drop out, so that was me.
Well, and speaking of, I think that was UFC Brazil, correct? Was that the one in Brazil?
No, I didn't. UFC Brazil was next. Milicic fought Mikey Burnett there, but I was UFC. It was in New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
Battle in the Bayou.
Well, I got to ask you. I guess there was a story about Bruce Buffer. Well, my friend asked me to ask you. They said there was a rumor that Bruce Buffer almost caused a riot in Brazil involving you, or an announcer did. Is that true at all?
When I was there?
That's why he told me to ask. I don't know. I never heard that story. He said Bruce Buffer announced you from a Brazilian gym, and the crowd got pissed or something.
Oh, no. So that was at King of the Cage in Saboba Casino in California. I had been training with Marco Huas for my last few fights. And then we had a falling out. He kind of tried to burn me a little bit. And we had a falling out. Stopped talking. I then had my next fight camp, my next fight. And right as I was walking out, they announced me fighting out of Huas Valley Tudo, even though I wasn't. And they just basically had the information from the fights before. So when the fight's over, I win my fight. I go backstage. Marco Huas, Peter Ertz, like some fucking killers, Pedro Hizzo, all these guys were standing there and confront me. They come circle up around me. And Marco's poking me in the chest, like, why are you you don't represent Huas Valley Tudo, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, bro, I didn't put that on there. They just repeated it from last time, And it was what really not started it, but like kicked it up a notch, was they had been losing. They had a handful of losses in a row for probably the last month. And I had just won. And as he's yelling at me, I was like, bro, at least I won. You guys got to win on your record this month, like that. And now he's blowing up. But so when they're around me, within 30 seconds, there's 20, then 30, then 40 of my guys, of good of my local guys, not just my gym, but like local gyms surrounding them. Then my dad jumps in the middle and starts poking Marco in the chest. And I'm like, stop it. I was like, stop. And I was like, putting his hand out. I was like, you're going to get us freaking killed, because we might beat them up, but the first layer, they're going to run through the first layer of people for sure. And it ended up getting squashed. Cops came over and security came over and whatever. But yeah, I was just like, at my dad's like, you don't understand. I was like, imagine the skills of me and how dangerous I am, and now make me 6'3", 240 pounds. And that's a problem.
Oh yeah, I'd never heard that story. He told me to ask you that last night. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was just in California, but yeah, it was wild.
You would have think they would have appreciated the free promotion.
That's what I said. That's what really made him mad.
I heard another story. I guess it was a Gracie gym where they didn't want you to fight, and something about you leaving their gym in order to fight. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was the beginning of my career. I had a couple of fights. I had already gone to Brazil. Came back, I was trained at the Gracie Academy, and I wanted to fight, and Hoyce was still the man, and he was fighting out of there. And I booked my first fight with Pat Milicic, and Jorge Gracie called me to the office and was like, hey, are you fighting this guy? And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, we can't have you fighting out of this gym. I said, why? I didn't, do they know you train here? And I said, well, I'm sure they know I train here. Everyone knows I train here, but I didn't like put it down as I'm fighting out of this gym or anything. I need to see your contract. And then I was like, well, I don't have one. Like this was 1995. Like how scarce were contracts back then? Maybe 97 at the time. I don't know. But I was like, I'll see if I can get one. And then he calls me back another time later, and he's like, hey, I can't have you. You can't take this fight. And I said, I can fight in challenge matches here. All these guys can fight in challenge matches here and represent you guys, but I can't fight professionally and get paid. And I didn't even put your logo or your name on anything. And he said, yeah. And so at the time, there were some really good guys that were already kind of fed up with a lot. And me and Mark Lehman, a guy named Ethan Milius, whose dad's John Milius. He's done like Apocalypse Now, Big Wednesday. He's done a lot of movies. Him, probably like 5 of us, I think. And then a guy named Avi Rubin. And Avi he was a Jewish dude that owned a bunch of pager stores, had a bunch of money, and said, let's go. We'll go open a gym. And I was like, all right, let's go. And we went to Beverly Hills, man. And he opened Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu right on Rodeo Drive. And started training there after that. But I just told Jorge, and I was like, listen, Hoist was in the room, and I told Hoist, I said, I love you, bro. I said, if you ever leave, I'll come train with you. I said, but Jorge, I'm not going to stay here and not fight. Like I'm training here because I want to fight. I want to be a coach in jiu-jitsu and teach later, but I want to fight. That's why I started training in the first place. And at the time I didn't have shit, bro. I dropped out of school in 9th grade. I had nothing. Like this was what I was going to do. And so I went downstairs and started getting my things together. And on the way out, this guy, Sam Rand, who was the gym manager, he says, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to open a gym, And he goes, Chris Brennan Jiu-Jitsu, fuck me. He goes, who's going to train there? And I was like, we'll see, brother. We'll see. And so I left, and that was like the fire that I needed forever. Like that guy lit the fire in me forever, because I'm going to prove to him, whether he knows, sees, doesn't see, whatever, in my head, I'm proving to him every day who's going to train there. I'm going to be a great teacher. I'm going to be a great coach. I'm going to be a great dad, and try to be a great fighter as well. I fought to the best of my abilities with the resources I had. I did everything out of my gym, unfortunately. So there wasn't a lot of traveling back then to train better guys. So I trained my own students to be as good as I could to be my training partners. And it got me to a high level, not as high as I could have been, but to a high level. And it got them to high levels as well. So that was the route I took. And I feel like I was pretty successful with it, and then used the success of where I did get to with the sport to be successful business-wise in the gym and, running gyms.
Well, you run Next Generation in, is it Frisco, Texas, I believe?
That's the headquarters. Yeah, that's a big one.
That's your big gym. Do you have like affiliate gyms, or is it just like a one gym thing?
No, I got 3 in Texas, 1 in Denver, 1 in California. I got 2 in Liverpool where Paddy Pimblett and Molly train. Another 2 in Ireland. There's a handful of them.
So I'd say so. You have quite a few guys other than your sons that fight for you. Who are some of the bigger names like fighting the UFC and stuff that you still have?
Tim Elliott. Train with Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott's flyweight in the UFC. He's been there for a long time. He's a stud. Mm-hmm. And then we had Victor Altamirano also fighting in the UFC in the flyweight division. And then Paddy, fights out of the Liverpool gym. He was just here at Syndicate yesterday getting some rounds in before he had to go back. But he's a standout for sure. He's the star, no question about that. And then, like I said, we're out here waiting. Right now I'm working with UFC fighters every day at Syndicate, and then my son is waiting on a short notice just to get into the UFC and see where we can go from there. I want to be the first dad with 2 kids, all 3 in the UFC. Before right now, there's 2 father and sons that have done it, but no father and 2 sons. So hopefully we'll be the first.
That'd be awesome.
Lucas should be right there. He's what, 11-2, I think.
Yeah, and he's. They know who he is. He's waiting right now on a short notice here. If someone falls out next weekend, we've got 6 featherweights fighting next weekend, 2 lightweights. We said we'd fight Bobby Green. We said we'd fight Grant Dawson tonight. We said we'd fight any of these guys at 55 or 45 just to get that first one to get in, and then, get settled and go from there.
Right on. So Tyler, he wrestled at, you said Division I in college, right?
Yeah. He was a Pac-12 Division I champ this year, NCAA qualifier.
Oh, okay. So he's a legit wrestler on top of his jiu-jitsu.
Oh, he's a stud, and he's got, 8 times jiu-jitsu world champion. He's like 293-9 in jiu-jitsu, and then just has gnarly wrestling on top of it. Now his striking's getting better and better while he's out here. He came straight from wrestling to syndicate, so he can just kind of start right away with the top guys. And I've got a good stable of fighters at home, but unfortunately they all started so much behind my kids that they're all getting better, but they're all amateurs and a couple of pros. But they just, when there's a big discrepancy in skill level, they're the ones pushing them. And I need the guys to push my kids as well. So that's why we're out here. And it sucks because the trickle down effect is the next best guy in my gym is now the best guy in my gym, not getting pushed, and if he leaves, the next best guy is the best guy. And if he leaves, so it sucks, but it's next generation MMA is the name of the gym. This is the next generation. So I've got to focus on getting them there. And hopefully my brother's at my gym coaching these guys right now, and hopefully they all have fights coming up. So, hopefully they can get to that level. And at one point, hopefully my gym ends up being something like Syndicate, but it's just difficult. Just being out here every day, someone random from the UFC shows up to train just because they're in town. Like there's constantly good guys coming in to train for a day, for 2 days, for a week because they're in town, just because it's in Vegas. Like the location is dope. And then you've got guys like Khalil Roundtree, Merab. Merab's got a stable of 15, 20 Georgians, Russians, and Chechens, Ukrainians. Tyler gets to train with Daniil. Daniil is a guy that just won this last Ultimate Fighter at 170. So him and Tyler train all the time. There's just, it's irreplaceable, the level of competition we get every day. And then the coaching from John. John, he's great because I've been training for 33 years, I think. And we get along great, banter back and forth. He's funny. When I was a kid, I was watching you, and he's like 6 years younger than me. He maybe more, but he's a really funny, but what a great coach. And I can sit and learn from him, even on the ground, just different stuff that he does. Obviously I know plenty on the ground, but just little things that he does, I learn every day. Wall stuff every day, striking stuff every day. So it's nice for me to be able to learn again and watch him do stuff and get better at coaching aspect of things. And then he enjoys work with my kids, so he gets to spend time with them and get them better. So I just, try to take it all in while I'm here.
Well, last thing we're talking about before we close, I got to ask, I heard a story on the internet years ago about you fighting a singer from a popular band. Can you tell us about that, if you will? Yeah,
it wasn't really a fight. It was, but it wasn't like a straight up, where we faced each other and fought. It was Everlast. Before it was while he was in House of Pain, and he was there. He was at a restaurant bar that I worked at called The Warehouse in Newport Beach. And he had started dating or trying to date a girl that my best friend was dating, and called it my best friend and ran his mouth to him. And, you don't know who I am, blah, 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 blah. And talking about his posse. Well, I had already started training, but I hadn't settled in life. I was still fucking psychopath. And I saw him come in to the bar. I was at the bar I was working at, The Warehouse. And he saw me, but I didn't give him a chance. I came from the side because we had already had words one time before about it. And then I said, next time I see you. and he walked in. He had 4 big black dudes with him, and I just came from the side, blasted him in the side, jumped on his back, and choked him. And we're on the ground, and we're probably 30 yards from the front door, and I choked this dude from the back door out the front door into the street, and never let go. And I'm lucky now that, you know, he's alive. But I was getting head kicked and soccer kicked by the guys that were with him, and I was trying to bury my head in his head, you know, so I wasn't getting kicked or they were kicking him, but my ribs in my head got kicked to death. And then they ripped us apart when we got outside, and he slept for maybe 30 seconds, which is a long time, you know, from a choke. He slept still out for 30 seconds. And apparently he had some sort of legal issues at the time. So his guys with him were telling the bouncers not to call the cops. So the cops didn't come. I ran that way. They ran that way. I got fired, obviously. I was working at the time. we went our separate ways, and I never had to deal with it legally. But yeah, I listen to his stuff now.
It's all water under the bridge.
Yeah, but he was, you know, back in the day, I was not going to let someone punk me or more importantly, my friends or family. And I just blasted him in the side of the head and choked him unconscious for a little while.
That's again, that's one of those stories you read on the internet. You don't know if it's true or not. So it's pretty funny that it is true.
It was true.
I think I read it on like MMA.tv back in the day. Remember that website? I think it used to be on there even.
Oh yeah. The motherfucking, what was it? There was a thread on there that had thousands of street fight stories. Yeah. Motherfucking liar.
I guess one more question before we leave, because that just brings me. Have you came across any black belts that are clearly fake? And what do you do to handle that situation? Like, you know, somebody that's not a black belt or whatever, just claiming to
besides Moneyberg
be or whatever, some fake fighter. How do you handle those situations, or did you back then?
Besides Moneyberg?
But beside him, like.
Yeah, I mean, randomly throughout time, throughout the years, I've definitely run into guys that claim to be black belts that either definitely were not black belts or had, you know, someone give them a black belt. To be honest, I have two students that have come to my gym 8 years ago, as black belts that got their black belts at seminars, and they rolled in my class. And before they signed up, they was like on their trial, and they rolled. And when they signed up, they asked for purple belt, and they legit had black belts already, gone through the get your black belt excitement and all that, and they literally moved back to purple. And it was humbling for them, you know, for sure. I didn't make them. I told him, you know, let's catch you up if you want. And he says, no, I don't really feel comfortable getting on your mat wearing a black belt. And they wore a purple belt, and you know, worked their way back. But it's I definitely, I don't like it. It irritates me. It bugs me when people, you know, are giving them away. I don't care. I had a guy train for 5 years before he got his blue belt, and I wasn't going to give him his blue belt until he was a blue belt, you know, and the day I gave him his blue belt, he never trained again, you know, and that's fine. That's fine. That was that was his goal, and that's fine. But that's why I wasn't just going to give it to him, you know. And he was a big dude, 6'5", probably 280 pounds, and would not play off his back, you know, would not show any guard at all. And I want him to be top bottom guy, and he was good on top, you know. And one day I was like, hey, let's roll. And he sat down and started playing guard and trying to sweep me with butterfly and whatever. And I was like, time out, everyone get on the wall. And I promoted him to blue belt right then. I was like, you know, and then ironically at the same time, he had bought 100 Bitcoin for $14 a piece and ended up selling them right then for about 48,000. And I never saw him again.
Must be. Well, he's a smart guy. If he got it on Bitcoin, I wish I had.
Yeah, you and me both.
Chris, thank you for your time. Some awesome stories. Do you have anything for us you would like to talk about or say before we cut out here?
No, guys, thank you for the time. It's always nice to get on these things and be able to talk about stuff, especially since we're way past, when I was doing it, but I've got my kids now that they don't love being on podcasts, but they get on them every once in a while. But it's good to be able to talk about all this stuff for sure. I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you, sir. And maybe we can have Lucas or Tyler on here sometime. That'd be awesome.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your time.
See you guys.
Yeah.